Today, we are privileged to have Linda Madureira of Five Avenue Partners, who is doing such an excellent job in the financial services, utilizing skills in the continent. She is just such an awesome leader, visionary, and also in execution. We're so thankful to have her here. Linda, welcome to NIASU.
So thank you, Jasmina, for having me. I think this is really special, but at the same time, it makes me feel old. But I'm so happy to be doing this. My name, as you said, is Linda Madureira, and I run a back office and accounting practice out of California. I'm based in San Francisco, the Bay Area. And I was born and raised in Zimbabwe. I'm the first in a family of five, the only girl. And so I've always had to, sort of try to play catch up. You can imagine being raised with just boys. So yeah, thank you. I'm so excited to be doing this.
Throughout the continent, education for girls is often seen as something secondary, whereas education for boys is something that is more prioritized and more privileged.
What I will say though is I was born in 1978, and I will say my mom was a nurse and my dad was a teacher. But because they were four boys in our family, I think that my parents actually valued the boys' education more than me. Because when we first went to school, the boys went to a better school. I don't know what it's like in other parts of the continent, but most parts of Africa, you have what they call A schools, which is where you have the mixed race schools, white and black, and then you have the all black schools. So my brothers went to the mixed schools that had libraries, that had cricket and rounders and all those, fancy sports like swimming. And I went to an all black school until 5th grade. I think my parents at some point realized, you know what, she's probably just as smart as the boys. We might as well take her to a school that's equally good. But even after transitioning, I just remember my parents catching a lot of flack because people would say to them, what do you think she's going to do with her education? She's just going to get married and then you're going to lose out. Why are you even bothering? Why are you sending her to boarding school? She's going to get pregnant anyway and then, not complete school. Yeah. So those are the things I had to constantly try to prove wrong.
You're absolutely right. Throughout the continent, education for girls is often seen as something secondary, whereas education for boys is something that is more prioritized and more privileged.
You have to work harder and just prove everybody wrong. So not only did I have to prove to my parents, I had to prove to a whole community that had completely written me off. Because let's face it, I was in a mining village. It was very small. Most girls didn't go past, I would say, the 7th, I don't know what it's called in Sierra Leone, 7th, 8th grade. Most girls didn't go past that. By that time, they were pregnant and married. So society took that same approach with me and chastised my parents and said, she's going to get pregnant anyway at 13 or 14. Why are you bothering? I have to, though, give my parents a lot of kudos because it took a lot of courage for them to finally make the decision to do that. And then when they realized how studious I was, I remember my mom making a deal with me. She said, look, as long as you're studying or reading your books, I'm not going to ask you to do dishes. I'm not going to ask you to clean the house. I'm not going to ask you to cook. So I got married at 21, unable to cook. I read a lot of books so that I could avoid all things cooking and all things housework. And I had to learn to cook when I got married.
That's really such an impressive journey that you've been on, because as you said, your community around you, the expectation was that by age 13, 14, girls would be pregnant, would not be able to pursue their education. Mm-hmm. But instead, your mom and your family supported you and believed in you and said, listen, you like to study. So while most of the girls around you may have, due to circumstances, gone down a different path, you actually, that's huge character building.
Yeah, and I want to say that it's what carried me through because fast forward to Bermuda, where I first met you, And my first job was with a fund administrator. And just to make it simpler, it's really an accounting firm. That's what fund administration is, and that's what I do now. It's an accounting firm, and what I learned is all of that accounting work that was being done in Bermuda, none of those companies that we were doing the accounting work for were even physically in Bermuda. Most of the companies were in the US. And that was the first time that seed of why can't we have this work being done on the continent? Because there are all these amazing people with amazing talent who can do the same work. And so the idea was planted, I think, 20 years ago, 2001, 2002. I just couldn't execute on it. You know, life happens, you have kids, you move. We moved to the US in 2006 to San Francisco when my daughter was 1. She's 17 now, thank God. My second one is 12. I can't believe. Yeah, I have a kid that's old enough to drive me around. It feels good. But fast forward to 2017, after all these years in industry, I worked for an audit firm, I worked for a hedge fund, all doing the same work in the hedge fund or venture capital space, doing accounting. Mm-hmm. And in 2017, I got fired. That was actually my third firing. My first firing was my first job in Zimbabwe at Ernst & Young. I'm happy to tell you why. So I was at Ernst & Young. I was young and stupid. I was probably, how old? I think 18. That was my first job. So because my parents didn't have enough money to send me to university full time, what I opted to do was to join Ernst & Young. And I think they probably have a presence in a lot of African countries. You know, the big four, Ernst & Young, Deloitte, EY, whatever. I don't know, Coopers and Lybrand. I don't know what they are now. But you could work for them and they would pay for your university. And so that meant my parents didn't have the burden of, you know, paying for me as well as my siblings, because it was already hard. When we were in high school and all three of us were in boarding school, I remember my parents having to walk us through, well, 2 of you are going to have their fees paid, but 1 of you is going to go to school with no fees paid. We're going to have a payment plan. And I was always that kid who went to school with a payment plan. And when the headmaster or the headmistress called out the names of the people that hadn't paid their school fees, I was always on that list and set aside in front of assembly. So I knew I needed to do something to help my parents, you know, with tuition.
How did that, even just that? So you are in school with students, and do they call your name out in assembly? How does it work? And how would you feel?
I think there was a certain level of acceptance about it. I understood and I trusted my parents when they said, we're going to make sure your fees gets paid. And, you know, occasionally I'd get home and the TV would be missing, you know, or the fridge would have been sold, and I would know, you know, my fees got paid, but now we don't have a fridge. So, I mean, it was just acceptance. I knew the only way I could work my way out is to stay in school. So I knew I couldn't get pregnant. I couldn't mess around. I couldn't be silly, because I understood that if this cycle needed to stop, I just had to stay in school.
Wow, that's incredible, because both your parents were working. Mm-hmm. And you would think that when both parents work in good professional jobs, that they'll be able to, what they earn will be able to support the family. And this is one of the things people may not fully understand about the continent, that it doesn't always work out like that. So go ahead.
Totally. I actually think a big part of it is my parents sort of overstretched themselves. You know, there were 5 of us. We were 2 years apart, so we were in high school at the same time, and they decided to take us to the fancy high schools. It wasn't a bad thing, but they definitely overstretched themselves. But looking back, I'm grateful that they did that, because those fancy schools are the reason I even learned of things like you can apply to Ernst & Young and go to college, you know, fully, you know, paid for. If I was at some, I don't know, low end, poor school, I don't know that that exposure would have come about. So I'm grateful. The experience itself was not traumatic for me. I don't look back on it with feelings of anxiety or trauma.
That's one of the value that this conversation and these conversations are going to bring is to let people become aware of the opportunities that you mentioned, like at ENY or PwC, just the journey that different people take, that no matter where you are, there's a way that you can take. It doesn't mean it's easy, because to arrive home and know that, oh, the fridge is missing. And it's that sense of financial balance. It's a value system, right? I am getting my fees paid, but we're not going to have any cold food.
We're gonna have to make a plan. And yeah, for years we made a plan. We would dry the meat and whatever, things worked out. But my first job at Ernst & Young, I didn't last very long. I was there about a year and a half. I wasn't doing very well in my studies because remember, you had to work full time and then study.
Wow.
So I wasn't doing very well. And at the time, racism was rife. I was not the only person that was not doing well academically, but I was one of the few people that got let go for failing exams. But the white girls and the white boys, they stayed working. They didn't finish their degrees for 7-8 years, but they still had a job. And I remember making a protest because that is the year that I got married to my husband, who's a true rebel. and we sat down and wrote a protest letter that I delivered to every single partner at the Ernst & Young office, because I felt what they had done was racist and they were picking on me because I was a Black woman. And so, of course, I got fired right away. As soon as I delivered that letter, I got fired.
So it's almost like you were doing a righteous act, saying this is not right. And just the fact that you are in full-time study and you're working, how many hours were you?
It's very difficult. You're putting in 50, 60 hours a week sometimes. And you're young. You're 18, 19, straight out of high school. You don't know how to organize yourself. Everything is a maze. And remember, I was a small town girl. I was coming from a small village and I'm thrust into a big city. I was working at Harare. You're just you're literally just trying to swim. You're thrown in the deep end. You have no clue how to just go about life, basically. Some people figured their way out, but I just didn't. And so I didn't survive. But that year, when I left, I got married and we moved to Bermuda. And that was where my fund accounting career started. And like I said, that seed of we've got to figure out a way to get this work done in Zimbabwe was planted in Bermuda.
So that's a really interesting point, the whole offshoring of services. Because prior to me going to Bermuda, I also wasn't aware that those things existed. And when I was looking for a job before I went to Bermuda, I wasn't even thinking of Bermuda. I was just down in London looking for a job. Went to a recruitment firm, and I remember there was a brochure on the table and it said Bermuda, and I picked it up and I looked at it. And I remember the recruiter who was there for a different job in London said to me, "Oh, that's not for you." And he took it. And I thought nothing. Wow. I just thought, I was so focused on whatever I was doing at the time, the reason I was there, which was for a local job in London. I didn't think anything until after I arrived in Bermuda. And then they would say, "Oh, we don't get many sort of Black British." And then just as they said that, I remember that incident and I thought that's probably why, prior to the changeover of the government back then, they weren't getting many people. So there are seeds there. But so we all experience various things. But can you explain this whole offshoring of services so people can understand how a company might be somewhere and they can actually have access to work on companies and entities that may not be in their physical jurisdiction?
Yeah, so thank God for technology. A lot has changed in the last 20 years. I think that if I tried to start this company 20 years ago, obviously I didn't have as much experience, so it would have been a whole lot different. But I think the tech is what has made the biggest difference. All of my clients are venture capital funds, and these are pools of capital from either private individuals or largely high net worth individuals or institutions like pension funds, endowments, and that sort of thing. They put money together and invest in companies while they're still in the garage, almost like investing in Facebook or Google while it's still a garage company. And those same funds do need accounting services. So We've got a technology that we license that is all in the cloud, that if somebody, wherever they're located, can log into our system, it's secure. We have a whole dual authenticator process for them to access the system. The servers are actually still in the US, they're in Ohio. So anybody working in our system is technically working in the US, even though their laptop and they're physically in Zimbabwe or wherever they may be. So the way that I've done it, we're still very small. So everybody that works for me, I usually will buy them a good laptop, and I'll send it to Zimbabwe either through someone, or when I go, I try to go every year, or when I go, I always bring a laptop, because I know I'm probably going to hire someone new and they're going to need a laptop and they're going to need to access our servers. And so they can access from wherever they're located, as long as I've given them the right tools and they can, do the work. We use a kind of project management tools, like Asana or Teams on Microsoft. And so everybody's kind of like on a platform, almost as if you're in the same room, where you can have a dashboard of the work that you need to do. You can see who has done it before, because I give people access to, memos, procedural notes, procedural documents, and you can always just ask someone, because, the Teams or Asana, all of that is live chats. So if you have a question, you can just type it in. Everybody in the group is going to see your question, and you can search things that have been asked before about a particular client, because all of that is documented. So technology has really made it that much easier for someone to work remotely. Is it easy? I would say no. The folks that have come to work for me have struggled. The biggest reason for that struggle, I would say, is the work habits. Now, I just told you, when I woke up, the first thing I did was go downstairs and I saw that my kitchen was a mess. But Fridays generally are my no work day, like easy work day. So it's okay if I go off schedule. But imagine if you're not used to a work from home type habit. You can easily get to your kitchen and be distracted, and before you know it, you've not been productive, and you're diving onto your work laptop at 1 p.m. when you should have been doing that at 8 in the morning. So I've had to teach people how to work from home, how to set aside.
And that is one of the really key points in this day of technology. There's so much that you've mentioned that we want to dive into, and we may even need to have you back, because there's so much content. So this discipline work habit is one which I'll come to in a minute. But add something that is so revolutionary, because we all understand that a lot of students graduate on the continent and throughout the diaspora, and they can't find work.
Yeah.
However, there you are, being able to create work and utilize skills on the continent. So actually providing employment for students who don't have to move. They can stay exactly where they are and provide a service. Can you do so if someone's thinking of doing something similar, can you give a sort of a high level view of how they could achieve that? I know everywhere would be different, and there are many, many more nuances.
Yeah, so, wow. Okay, so I'll give this from the perspective of the job seeker a little bit, because I know a little bit about that too. And then I'll give it from the perspective of an entrepreneur who wants to start something similar. From the job seeker's perspective, there's now actually quite a few, I would say, online platforms where you can sign up. Sorry, excuse my Alexa. There's actually a few sites where you can sign up, and a good example is Upwork.com. There's also Upwork, and what's the other one? Jeez, I'm forgetting the other one, but I'll come back to it when I remember it. But on Upwork, I've actually hired a guy in Kenya to do my internal books. So you can put in your profile, your CV, your abilities. And what they'll do is, once you've done a few projects or a few pieces of work for people, whether an accountant, a graphic designer, actually my website was prepared by 2 women in Mexico. So I've literally become the queen of offshoring. there's, there's nothing I don't do. If I need to get something done, I'll start first by looking for labor on the continent.
Yeah.
So anywho, there's a bunch of sites. I'll start with Upwork, but you can get your profile out. You can, and when do you sign up for work? If you say I'm an accountant or I'm a bookkeeper, don't oversell yourself, because your inability will become clear very, very quickly, because you've got no one supervising you. You've got no one showing you how to do the stuff. So if you say I'm a bookkeeper, better be a good bookkeeper, because you're going to be given a task that will say, get this to me by, that's usually how it works. Get this work to me by such and such a time. And if you're not a good bookkeeper, you're not going to be able to deliver. So yeah, so that's my advice to a job seeker. If you're an entrepreneur, I will say, because of how technology is, think about your expertise. And then once you decide, well, this is my expertise, this is my area of expertise, and you want to build a business around it, everything now is so easy to set up. So your email infrastructure, for example, I use Google, and I've never hired an IT person. Whenever I have an issue, and it's so easy to use, my domain, I bought that myself on GoDaddy. My website, I found these women in Mexico after looking for people in Zimbabwe, but nobody was being, responsive in time. And so once all of that is set up, you don't even need an IT person. Once you set up your servers and everything, if you have an issue, you're going to chat with the Google bot, and the Google bot will help fix your problem. If you license Microsoft for your email, if you have an issue with Microsoft email, you're going to email Microsoft. So it makes the whole process of building a business and putting in the infrastructure so much cheaper. I've never had an IT person. I once hired one, and I had to let them go because there was no use for them. I was paying them a monthly retainer, and there was no use. And then finding your, I would say, finding your resources, because setting up a business is the 3 P's, right? People, process, and product. Your product is a function of, what am I good at? What do I know that I'm capable of selling? For me, it was accounting services, specifically fund accounting. So that was easy. And then the process bits, I knew I had to sort of go through a check the box type of process, where I said, I know that I want an accounting system that's going to do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So I had my list. And so when I went out looking for an accounting platform to do what I wanted to do, I had to check off those things. Can it do 1? Can it do 2, 3, 4, 5, 6? And then, at some point you realize, well, maybe I'm not going to get everything. What can I compromise? What can I, do without, and that sort of thing. So that was the process bit, figuring out the actual infrastructure in terms of, what's the accounting system? What's the investor reporting system that I'm going to need to use? How secure is it? Because now everything's in the cloud. But the security around all of these cloud-based platforms has really, really improved. So for me, licensing other technologies meant I didn't take on personally as a firm, I wasn't taking on the risk of my email servers getting hacked, because it's Google. Google is responsible. I wasn't taking on the risk of my investor portal getting hacked, because Dynamo is my service provider and they can figure that shit out. So sorry, excuse my language, but I really made sure that I could license other people and take the risk away from me personally. And it also meant I could just focus on the things I'm good at and not worry about, oh, how do I keep this server secure? And then the third thing, which is the most difficult, is people. So I said product, process, people. People is something I'm still actually struggling with, but identifying the right people for the right job is actually the hardest part, because you're operating in a remote sort of environment. So you do need people that understand taking account, understand being accountable without someone saying, did you check in at 8? Were you in the office until 5? So we had to create a whole different way of not only compensating people, but also incentivizing people to do the work without me having to supervise every single day to say, did you put in 8 hours?
So this whole area of and I'd made a note before when you mentioned in recruiting students or recruiting professionals on the continent or wherever in the diaspora as well, there's an element of training people. Not everyone has that discipline. And that's something, as time goes on, is a skill and a service that people may need actual training on. Is that something, because you're now so experienced, is that something that your firm may consider delivering in addition to? Because not many people have set up and been so successful at utilizing skills and setting up an infrastructure where they have a business, they deliver laptops and things to the young professionals on the continent or wherever, and coach them and mentor them to be able to deliver in time. So that's an area that's growing, that has a big need.
Yes. So it's on my to-do. So one of the things I've been trying to do is hire enough people that can focus on the day-to-day business, so I can focus on the other things, like the things you just spoke about, which is how do we help a young person who's in high school who says, well, how do I go about preparing myself for this 22nd century type work environment? The biggest thing I've learned in the couple of years I've been in business is people don't know basics, like how to write a proper email, a proper business email. Because when you're working remotely, that is the only communication that is going to happen. So how you put across your communication is really critical. When folks start working for me, my guys laugh when they're able to send an email without me looking at the email first. They're like, yay, I've arrived. Because when folks first join, I don't let anyone send an email to a client without me actually reviewing it. And I mark it up and I'll say why you can't use the word I, why you can't use the word you, or, that sort of thing. I have to explain the basics. This is a formal communication, so you need to discuss things formally. So those are critical skills that people need to have. Even using email, for example, our high schools are not preparing our students for the ability to operate in the 21st or 22nd century. Is it 22nd? I don't know. So that's something I really, really do care about. I've just not found the bandwidth because I don't feel like I have enough resources within the business for me to change focus right away. But that is definitely something on my to-do.
Yes, one of the objectives and goals of this NIASO platform is to do just that, because we recognize that there are many skills that our young people don't have for various reasons. And so therefore, we're also building out. So we're encouraging anyone who has any kind of training you want to package in an online format that's offered on the platform, so people, students, young professionals can access it and actually learn and bring up their skill level, so then they too can sign up for Upwork. So they may be graduated, they may have the technical skills, but they don't have all the other soft skills around it to be able, and discipline to be successful. So that's something that we're looking forward to including in the platform, really, so we can, because we have the young, we have the youth, we have the projection of a larger youth base globally, where Africa is like the place where young people are going to be multiplying and growing. So how are we going to leverage all these people to educate them to that level? So this is one of the reasons why NIASO is there. It's like, okay, we see this gap. Let's encourage professionals like yourself to create, when you have a bandwidth, put it there so we can actually elevate our students.
Totally. And one of the things that I think I'd be happy to do is I can have, so if you have students or whatever, I can pair some of your students with my team in Zimbabwe, and they can share their experience about what they learned, what was most helpful, because I always think sometimes it's always good to hear from the horse's mouth. I'm telling you what I think I taught them, but if you talk to them, they'll probably tell you something completely different. So another thing I always notice too is folks, when they even making an application, when I put out an ad, for example, and I use social media a lot. I will say social media is really powerful. That is how each of us builds their brand. You said when we started this call, you were like, Linda, I do once in a while check into your Facebook and I can see what you're doing. Our paths separated how long ago? 15 years ago? But yes, but it doesn't feel like it's been 15 years. Why? Because you see me on social media. And I tell people all the time, social media is your brand. You're always selling, no matter what you do, whether you're a gardener, landscaper, housemaid, whatever, you're always selling, and use social media wisely. So I don't separate my personal profiles like Facebook with my Twitter, for example. Yes, the content is different, but across all those platforms, you will see a very consistent Linda. My brand is very, and I've always been this really thoughtful. I'm not out there putting out lies, but I'm out there making sure whatever I put out really gels with who I want to be, maybe aspirationally even, you know, and what I want to accomplish. And young people don't realize this sometimes on the continent, because as soon as I get an application, what is the first thing I do? I look for their social media presence.
Yes.
Is that your door?
It is the joys of after school people coming and not, and other people not going to answer the door. Excuse me.